Okay, welcome everyone to Breakout 6, our second day of ICCS. It's wonderful to see a lot of you here, although we're talking about perhaps a worrying topic, extremism and polarisation in this breakout. But we have two wonderful experts who can help us understand from different sort of perspectives. So Rabbi Chemen will speak first. They'll be coming to the podium. They have PowerPoints, so that will hopefully help take you through the quite difficult issues they're going to be talking about. And then Professor Mike Hardy. Again, you've got all of their biographical details in the ICCS programme, so I'm not going to spend any more time talking about that. Perhaps sort of just mentioning, of course, talking about polarisation and extremism, I'm not going to give a big introduction here. I think so many of our speakers over the last day and a half have made us very much aware of the challenges that we're facing. We've seen both, if you like, personal stories, as well as, if you like, those very hard sort of facts coming from these surveys that we're in a very challenging world situation at the moment. I'd also perhaps say when we talk about extremism, it's one of these words we often sort of use it in quite a negative way, in various ways. But of course, to be extreme is just to be different from, if you like, the mainstream. We can have extremists who both want to do very positive things to change the world, but also to drag us into sort of very polarised sort of situations. And of course, that polarisation is part of what we're looking at here. And so when we live in a world where we have people in their little echo chambers, increasingly sort of demonising each other, and like these very normal forms of sort of human othering that we've seen throughout history are becoming sort of exacerbated now by social media and artificial intelligence that can sort of, as we've heard sort of in our last sort of plenary, dive down to the individual sort of level and pick up our particular sort of personal sort of triggers. We live in a very dangerous time, and I think increasingly sort of governments and civil society is aware of how we need to sort of look at these trends towards polarisation and find ways to overcome it. So I won't take up any more of our time, so Rabbi Chemen, please. Oh, actually, just 1 second, I should have mentioned already, but of course, Pigeonhole is there. They will flash the QR code, which is up here, so you can put in your questions as we move along. So, Rabbi, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you. I'm very touched by being here. It's my first time in Singapore. And as you may know, I am a rabbi, a woman rabbi. I live in Buenos Aires, 35 hours flight from my home. But it deserves all the efforts to be near a humanity that it doesn't appear oftenly in the news. There is the humanity of the people that gather from all over the globe, many religions, many nationalities, many ways of thinking, and we are here together because this matters to all of us. I must confess that when I was put in this breakout room, I understood wrongly that it was going to be a workshop. And I thought that you were going to be 20 people working in a round table and making methodologies to understand extremism and polarization. But we are going to make a sort of these things because I am not a researcher and I'm not a politician. I am only a spiritual leader that through my own religion tries to understand humanity and tries to plant seeds of compassion, justice, and love in this world as much as I can. Another thing that we were speaking with Mike, because we prepared this session, and really I'm overwhelmed because my two partners are keynote speakers, so imagine my responsibility. But we were preparing this session, and I said to them, the fact is that in these places, the people that attend to this conference is very important, are all the convinced people. Are all you believe that cohesion, multiculturalism, interreligious dialogue, it's worthy, right? So I am speaking to the convinced people, or perhaps I am speaking to those people that can spread all over the things that we are speaking and sharing those important days. So my proposal is that we are going to examine the categories that we were being told all over this day and a half in ourselves. What I propose to you is to think about ourselves, how we naturalized, even we are good people, how we naturalized, how we live with some categories that we even don't know that we have, and some ways of thinking, looking at the other, that are in us, and perhaps we have to deconstruct ourselves. So the proposal is to work on ourselves, on our souls. It's time to think about each of us and not about big categories as societies, state, hybrid, technical. It's ourselves. Also, I have prepared a long PowerPoint that the organizers told me that it's too long, so I cut it, but I promise you all the research that I did, it's going to be in an article further, so we can share then the things that I prepared for you today. So a little bit. I understood that I want to take you from the reflex of closing doors to the art of opening path, healing polarization through shared humanity. I found an exhibition made by a German photographer, K. Feidenhofer, that he recently passed away, that he took 10 years taking pictures of all the walls of the world. And this is interesting. In a world divided by fear and difference, the journey towards unity begins with understanding and compassion. And these are some of the pictures. We can see Cyprus, North and South Korea, Baghdad in Iraq, Ceuta and Melilla in Spain and Morocco. We see Israel and Palestine. We see Mexico and USA. We see Greece and North Macedonia. Walls that people pretend to be sure inside the fortress that they build, without understanding that more open our windows are to humanity, more strong we are, more rich we are. So this is a possibility of having a window, but I ask you please, in silence, to think about the bricks that we ourselves, the good people that are here, put to cover the window that allows us to see beyond ourselves, to see beyond our categories, as suddenly, without even noticing, we are closing our minds, we are closing our hearts, and the world becomes smaller and smaller. And the point is, how did we get to this point? Because we are agree that it's better the other way round. But how we got to this point? So I brought 6 categories. I'm glad to say that even the president of Singapore mentioned one of them, but one of the things that we were educated in fear as a political driving force. Like when we were children and we were arguing with a friend on a park, and we were just running to our mother or father to, to protect us. No? The fear that the fear of the other, this powerful emotional tool that mobilized many times the masses, that mobilized many times the voting of the people, and we finally vote in a democracy, a king, a totalitarian king that protects us from the others that threaten us. An example very usual is to say how the German society could vote Hitler, because Hitler was absolutely clear about his program, right? But when you have the fear of these populations that threaten your calm society, your economy, your citizenship, the pure race. So you, through fear, you decide, so societies decide so many times wrong. Another thing is so many, even Paul, you already mentioned, no? How we create the echo chambers, and the social media finally reinforces the pre-existing beliefs, blocking dissent and increasing antagonism. And blocking dissents make us so much poorer in our possibility of understanding the other, our possibility of discussing with the other. You know that there is in Judaism a phrase that says, perhaps you know, that there are 2 Jews and there are 3 opinions. Do you know this? 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And usually you think that, but because we argue all the time, that we never agree with the other. But no, this is not about 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Is that if you have an opinion and I have an opinion, we might find the 3rd opinion. We have to seek, to look for another possibility to continue being together. And my purpose is to ask you, when you are immersed in your echo chambers, do you ever think about which voices you have never heard? Do you need, or do you feel the need of going out your bubble to understand, to seek, to go to those that are not part of your information all the time, to enrich your views, to enrich the possibility of diversity, even in information? The third, these exclusive identity narratives. When national, religious, or ethnic identities are built in opposition to the other, social cohesion turns into exclusion. When you are so convinced of an exclusive identity narrative, all the other identities have to be or ignored or destroyed. And I ask myself, and I ask yourself, how many times you were said or educated, at what point does my identity need an enemy? How many times we defined our identity in opposition to the others? How many times we listen to a religious person, to a political person, and we immediately stand in front of the other, as if our exclusive narrative is the only thing that we can afford or accept or live with, instead of opening these windows that we are closing all the time. The accelerating pace of globalization undoubtedly strengthens people's need for identity as a reaction. Identity is not a bad concept, but identity with others. Identity, it doesn't have to do to be equal of the, I don't know, in English is identity, idéntico in Spanish, you know? Identity in Spanish is like I have to be the same as you. It doesn't have to be the same as you. Identity is that I have an identification with you. This is what we are seeking to. Then what I propose is a manipulated memory. A silenced collective pain turns into resentment. You know, all of us were educated, grew up in a certain narrative. But we have to be aware, because there is an official story, but maybe that also there might be an unofficial story that we were not told. When we think that our narrative is the truth and the others is a lie, is a fake, the problem is that we are accelerating these processes of being isolated, of being inside our walls, even when they don't exist physically. Then I thought that perhaps we have to speak a little bit more about hate speech, words that hurt, narratives that destroy. And I may go back to the Holocaust, and I may say, you know, that the Holocaust didn't begin with the final solution. It began with words, as all the genocides in our globe. They begin with words, with some assumptions about certain groups of people, with convincing the population that this is a threat. Every single word that is full of hate does so much harm that we even don't know. And I ask you, and I ask me, how many times we used hate speech even without noticing, and how many times we accepted hate speech without saying nothing because it's natural today. And may say in schools, teachers say, you know, they are teenagers, they are used to communicate like this. No, my friend, no. Hate speech is all over. Hate speech must be educated since you are a small child. And for the last one, that it was mentioned today also, the persistent inequality, the breeding ground for radicalism. And of course, inequality are, at least in my region, in my country, inequality is part of the reality. But my point is, how many times in your life you think that you can do something to fight against inequality, even you are not a politician, even you are not an economist? How many little things, deeds, how it was said in the morning, how many little actions you can take because the problem also is yours? Even we are not the poor, even we are not the migrant, even we are not the minority, religious minority. How many things we decide to do when we are speaking about inequality? In summary, 6 key drivers of social polarization: fear as a political driving forces, information bubbles create echo chambers, exclusive identity narratives, the manipulated memory, a silenced collective pain turns into resentment, hate speech, and the persistent inequality. And you know what? Next, it's not about others, it is about me. It is about me. But not to finish, if so, what can we do? Not to finish with this tragedy. Let's think about what, yes, we can do as important people, but also as normal, common people. I will read from the screen because it's bigger. Against fear as a political tool, my suggestion is, why don't we dare to open the circle, to move from self-preservation to shared vulnerability, to replace the search for absolute certainty with spaces of mutual care. It is so important when you are with others, the total other, and you share with him your own vulnerability. We don't have to be all the time as strong, as sure, as convinced. Why don't we share our vulnerability, our fears, our panic, our sensibilities? Against the naturalized exclusion, maybe that perhaps we can make the invisible visible, to refuse to let people remain footnotes, intentionally rewrite narratives to include silenced voices. And in front of historical trauma and unresolved injustices, why don't we wave shared memories, shift from competitive suffering to braided memory, honor pain without hierarchy? You know, Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor that received the Nobel Prize of Peace, he said, even we Jews that were the victims of perhaps the worst genocide in history, we don't have any right to compete with our suffering without acknowledging the suffering of the others. Moreover, we that were victims have to be the first to fight against the suffering of anybody for any purpose. And this is for me the most important. Also the Bible says, protect the stranger, because you were a stranger in Egypt. So an ethical religiosity to put your fellow, as it was said today, to put your fellow in front of you. Then, for hate speech and dehumanization, why we don't return to a language as shelter, why we don't create shared linguistic shelters where dignity is restored and meaning is co-owned again. Beyond countering hate speech, this is about consecrating speech through ethics and beauty. And then about the echo chambers and the algorithm, I have the purpose in my life till I'm dead to fill all my networks with good vibes, with good news, with good images. I mean, I was looking at Instagram yesterday night, and so many people posted what is happening here. And I think that also the algorithm has no soul. If we can change, and also I teach the youngsters to interrupt the feed. We receive in social media many provocations, right? And we tend to answer the provocation, right? We intend to defend ourselves. And I say to the people, just explain, just put the beauty. If you receive a prejudice, just don't respond. Just act with dignity and explain the universe, your truth, the beauty of your religion, your political position, your message to the world. We have to change what we post, not to be closed because of the fear and the violence that we receive. This is what I teach to the youngsters. And persistent equality, breeding ground for radicalism. The last one, not charity. Please, not charity. Inequality, we are not going to solve the problem of inequality with charity. It's a nice commandment in our religions, not charity. A big civil responsibility to fight against this. The shift happens when those who, with privilege, see repair as a common project, not as a benevolence. You know that in Hebrew, the word for charity is tzedakah, and tzedakah has to do with justice. In Arabic is sadaqna, right? Is to repair with justice the inequality that we human beings in our society have made. To finish with, every wall we raise to protect ourselves eventually becomes a wall we must tear down to recognize one another. Every wall we raise put us inside the wall. Put us inside the wall. It's not that we pretend to defend from the other outside, but we remain alone inside the walls. Polarization thrives in silence, in distance, in fear. But every time we choose to stay at the table, here, to listen, to speak with humility, to share space with those we don't understand, we build a different kind of architecture. And as it was said today also, not walls to divide, but oases, like Fadi says today, but bridges that hold the weight of our shared humanity. The work of cohesion is not to erase differences, but to make room for them, because only in that room can peace become more than a dream. It shall become a practice. And I will say in Spanish, muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Chemen. A lot for us to think about there, and I can see already thinking about it because the questions are starting to come in on pigeonhole. Just to mention, if you haven't scanned it yet, and I can see only 16 of you have scanned it, there's over 100 people in the room. So if you want to ask your questions, scan this, and then you can enter the questions in here. I'll just perhaps say, certainly a lot to think about, and you've given us another analogy. On the first day, we had the President Farman talking about tapestries. We heard about fortresses and oases this morning. And now you've mentioned, of course, windows and walls as another sort of metaphor through which you imagine our engagement to different people, which I think is useful. That in different places, these different metaphors are going to resonate, I think, quite strongly with different people. But I don't want to take up any more time, as we still have Professor Hardy to come up. So, Mike, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. And this is quite an act to follow, let me tell you. When Silvina and I met, we met on Zoom to discuss what we were going to do. And without any predetermined discussion, it turned out we had quite a compatible and consistent conversation to take you through. And I just look back at yesterday. I had the privilege of saying a few words yesterday. And I'm really pleased that they seem to make sense, at least to me. I talked yesterday about the importance of distinguishing between a moment in time, a snapshot. We've heard a little bit more about that from the radar discussions. And look at a movement, at a journey, at a direction of travel. And certainly in the day and a half that we've had, that's been hugely a powerful part. The other thing that Silvina mentioned, this is a room full of believers. That's the phrase I used yesterday. We're all here because we are believers, because we don't have any problem with the issue. But we have something that's very powerful in common. We do have a common ground. And let me suggest to you, and why I agreed to talk about how to confront polarization, how to confront the extremism that leads us to these 6 closed positions that we've talked about. We have a shared interest and question about what we need to do. It's no good coming to the conference in Singapore and just enjoying the experience. We have a responsibility to leave here better equipped to do something. And secondly, we have a shared question about what can we do. No use just knowing what we ought to do, what's possible. So in my contribution today, I'm going to try and focus on that, on the consequences. We can't change the world, but we can certainly be stronger in a world that's difficult. And both the President, the Sultan, the conversations with navigation today, the radar has all underlined and talked about that. And I'm going to finish my short moment talking about resilience, which also came up on the radar. And this is the way we respond to the forces that drive us apart, by building and being committed to a sense of inner strength that becomes community strength, that becomes global strength. And I shall talk about that in terms of resilience. So why is it important? We're not spending time in this breakout group defining polarization, defining extremism. We know what it is. Polarization is a major centrifugal force that takes us out of the middle ground, the very middle ground that we know is important to manage difference, to celebrate difference, and to live with difference. So polarization must be everything that we don't want. It's worse, as Catherine Fiske said yesterday, it's worse than fragmentation because it's a removal of the ability to populate the middle ground. Why is it important? It's because we're in a terrible time and we have to confront that. We're less secure than ever before in our history. We're better informed, but we're actually more misinformed. And the digital age has created real challenge for us as well as opportunity. We've heard a lot about it already. We have declining levels of trust. The glue that helps us in that middle ground when we're allowed to populate it is dissipating. And we're more unequal, as has been stressed, less fair, despite being more connected. We actually are closer to people who have advantage over us. And that creates the sorts of tensions that we need to confront. So extremism and polarization are significant parts of where we're at, of this snapshot. And they affect all regimes, whether they're democratic and participatory or whether they're more authoritarian. Don't think they're just the privilege of democracies that are struggling in this current time. Both represent growing ideological chasms. Both shape public opinion. Both give texture to national conversations. And both complicate the governance process. And all those things are important. So polarization and extremism take this ground from us. And these are the very things we need in order to achieve what we know is a better place. Both heighten divisions and social fragmentation. Polarization increases the very trust that we want, intensifies debates, sharpens and polarizes conversations, makes the coalitions, the collaborations, much more difficult. And social solidarity, any form of bonding and bridge building between us becomes really much more difficult. Just look around the world as we speak at the degree to which polarization has changed what's possible, changed what's easy. Nothing's easy anymore. And extremism, as Paul described earlier, no matter how you define it, whether it's violent or whether it's just a strong position, it alienates, it escalates divisions, it hardens positions, it makes collaborations much more difficult. So the stakes are high. The three things that have come out strongly for me during the first day and a half: the change in the pace at which things are moving is accelerating, and that's creating much more challenge for us all. I referred also to the notion of paradox. That's come up over and over again. The least likely outcomes are now confronting us as normal outcomes. We have to deal with paradox, and we have to manage the complexity that we now better understand. Let me take one of those as examples, given the time. Being comfortable with paradox, I think, is a qualification for resilience in the 21st century. Take this example. Technology which has increased the quantity of our connection and distant ties at the expense of the quality of the connection to closest ties. This is an ultimate paradox that we have to deal with. We want all this connectivity, but when we get it, it creates tension and problem for us. Familiarity breeds trust, but it also breeds contempt. The more we see, the less we might like, the less we might respect. The paradox of the 21st century in the digital world. I'm going to look at, I am in the academy, I'm going to look at a model I've used, which I've drawn from conversations with public leaders. My research is not into polarization and extremism. It's actually into what public leaders should do about it. And trust matters, as we've heard already. And we heard from the radar discussions the issues about horizontal trust and vertical trust. And I just want very quickly to explore this because it is, for me, really helpful to understand for public leaders to take forward, for how you as leaders can go from this place and change cultures and behaviors and understandings in your networks. So we know in horizontal trust, we're essentially showing how we have a spectrum between a very fragmented set of relations to much more solidarity. In social psychology, this is work moving from the out-groups to the in-groups, to the familiar people that you're comfortable with, to the different people that you have to get to know and you're just not a little sure of. The vertical trust is the relationships between you as an individual or individuals in your community and institutions and structures, followers and leaders. We've heard that horizontal trust in this region is quite strong, whereas vertical trust is more problematic. But the essence is, again, between fragmented societies, where there's difference between you and your leaders, or you and your institutions, your bank, your supermarket, your hospital, if you don't trust them. In my work, I've put them together. By putting them together, because they are interdependent and dynamic, we know, for example, from research, it'd be interesting when the radar continues, if people find together that they distrust government, that bonds them horizontally. And so it often happens that you get really cross with something up there, and that provides you with a sense of trust and unanimity. You know, there's a great writer, H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds. 1908 it was written. You've probably seen the movie. I've certainly seen the movie, but I did read the book. If you remember the story, this was a story of a world that was at war with each other. Conflict was huge. And along came the Martians from outer space. And it gave a reason for everyone to bond very quickly because there was a common threat. Very, very much foresightful novel that talked about the issues and the relationship between vertical and horizontal trust. Well, I've used it, we could go on about that if you attend a course, to look at the ways in which combinations of vertical and horizontal trust might give us the ability, if we understand them better, to mobilize strategies for change. If you have, looking back, if you feel really valued and engaged with your government, your participants, you're strongly bonded, but you're in a quite low trust area in terms of your horizontal, then you'd be in a position where there was a dominant elite. And you can look round to regimes and societies which have dominant elites, which are characterized by structures of internal trust-based relationships of that kind. If you're not trusted, don't trust your government, but you trust each other, then you have very top-down divisive leaderships. I can tell you a lot of leaders that I've interviewed for my work who characterize this. People don't really like them, but they like each other, and that's very top-down. They have a source of power that doesn't rely on the people liking them. You'll know the sorts of regimes that we might be meaning. And similarly, when you have very low levels of public trust and quite low levels of horizontal trust, then you have an autocratic minority-led situation. None of these would be strong for social cohesion. And these three quadrants, these first three quadrants, are all examples where polarization and extremism has got in the way of a coherent and cohesive society. And of course, the ideal one is when you have very high levels of vertical trust, a social contract in which people respect and trust their government, their banks, their hospitals, and where there is actually some agreement between each other as well. High participation and engagement. Each of these quadrants provide a different context for us to look at polarization and extremism, and remind us that the context that we're applying our concerns are different and diverse in themselves. So we have to deal with the reality then that extremism and polarization are both going to be with us for a very long time. This is my notion of time and movement. We cannot expect a magic bullet, a magic solution. The 6 strategies that Silvina laid out take time, take energy, take investment. And you're going to only be successful to a degree. You'll edge along the road towards a better place. That's because the nature of the complexity, the nature of the uncertainty and that we have to navigate. So they're going to be with us for a very long time. So the best, most effective way of dealing with them, in my view, my judgment, is to look upstream and change the ethos and the culture of the people and the behaviors and the communities. And I'll finish, if I may, by looking at a few of the ways in which we can change and build cultures and behaviors more likely to be resilient in the face of these polarization and extremism are examples of things that come to disrupt the coherence and cohesion, disrupt the safe communities that we can raise our families in, disrupt the safe nation-state relationships that we enjoy for trade, for tourism, and for peace. So in building resilience, there's always a combination between me, yourself, your individual strength, and that of your context. So in my work, I've looked at individual mobilizing personal resilience resources, as I call them. And I'll give some examples without taking too much of your time. Individual resilience comes from two sources. Processes, the way you actually put in place a strategy to deal. Most of our resilience is damaged by our anxieties, by worrying, by not having confidence. So a process would be that you'd spend time helping people with their anxieties. Where do you go when you're really worried about something? If you have an existential threat on your family or your community, that's a source of tension which breaks down horizontal trust and breaks down vertical trust. Where can you go? And we also have a set of outcomes that we need to encourage, how you re-engage with actions to do that. So you have a flood that destroys your house. You'll know where you can go to help with your anxieties. You rally around, you get your community together, but you also can do some things which will prevent the worst aspects of the outcome. And it's the same with the situation. The community resilience comes about how your community mobilizes, and there were some good examples in the last presentation, how we can enable, we can set up a process, we can set up a workshop, we can set up a meeting where we can have dialogue. Or, in terms of outcomes, we can manage the responses. We can highlight and celebrate that we've achieved this. Let's do it again. Let's repeat it. So building resilience requires us to take control of processes over time and take controls of actions during that time. And this is sort of my conclusions from most of the conversations I had in my research about countering populism. And I'm very happy to have conversations or questions. But in the central boxes are the four things that we need in order to counter populism. Populism's here, it's going to come, it's coming for all the reasons we've heard already about the nature of complexity and uncertainty, the nature of the dynamics of the failing capitalist system, the failing democratic system, the explosion of the digital world. But what do we need to be resilient? We need purposefulness, we need confidence, we need adaptability, and we need social support, community action. And in the yellow boxes, it just explores them a bit more. So there are things we can do. What can we do to become more purposeful as a community and resist the mobilization of polarized political parties? What can we do to be more confident, to have more positive emotions about the problems we confront, and so forth? Now, when you buy the book, and you'll see it worked out in much more detail, there are 16 things that I've added to give more flesh to these general statements. And I'll rattle through these because it's not the purpose for me to leave these in your memory banks. But I think it's not enough just to enable and make possible engagement and dialogue. It's not enough to set in motion the processes that can resist extremism or resist the development of polarizations. We have to be adapting our cultures over time through long-term investment in change. And there are things we can do. And on this list are some illustrations. We can promote more collective leadership cultures. Not think of leaders as heroes, as individuals, as personalities. I often say, Mr. Trump's America is not Mr. Trump's America. Mr. Trump is the American president. It's America that we need to look at. Let's look at individual personalities. The same could be true of my prime minister, who disappoints at times. It's not about personalities. We can promote collective leadership. You are leaders. We can practice the transparency we talk about. We can believe in it, but we can actually do it ourselves. We can be very clear about our feelings, our views, our anxieties, our passions, what we like and what we dislike. We can embrace vulnerability and psychological safety. We can be honest when we're in fear of a neighbor that we don't understand. We can reach out and change that. We can enhance cross-cultural competencies by recognizing that there are different cultural competencies. We can institutionalize agility. We can't just say to be agile. What does that mean? We can change the structures in which we adapt and through which we adapt. My university's just introduced 6 intakes a year to its courses. When I was at university, I know that's an age ago, we had 1 intake a year in September, first semester. We now have 6 intakes a year because the university has adapted to the fact that students are demanding much more flexibility, agility. They may not be ready in September. They might want to come in April. We can encourage continuous unlearning and relearning. We can really commit to communities that are based on learning, not on answers and solutions, asking questions. We can encourage change in that regard. We can develop inclusive problem-solving capabilities. We can invest in enhanced communication. The list is obvious. What it's saying, with humility but honesty, there are things that we can do. Not just angst about polarization, about political misinformation, about being captured by elites. We can do some very basic things on my very basic list. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much, both Silvina and Mike. I can certainly see, as you have said, we had a preparation for this. We can see a lot of resonances coming out from this. I mean, things you've both mentioned, different phrases. You talked about to convince people here. You mentioned we have the believers here. And of course, this is one of these problems that we have in many situations where people come together to discuss sort of dialogue and sort of how we solve this. And this is actually one of the questions we have coming out of this. It's addressed to you, Silvina. So the question is to Silvina. You have showed us transformative gestures that can help in combating polarization. However, these are predicated on the individual being willing to practice these gestures. What do we do when an individual is not interested in getting to know the others in the first place? So I think perhaps I can ask you both this question. I think you're both sort of invested in this. Yeah, basically, how do we bridge that polarization? How do we get to the people on the other side to break it down? So yes, let's Silvina first. It's addressed to you.
Okay, great question. There are so many people that want to do something and they don't have the space that perhaps we, as teachers, we always point to this, that it's not behaving well and we are not taking care about all the others. My point is that let's start with all those people that are in the middle, that they are not totally opened, but they are not against. So when you open the field, you may be so surprised. How many, I was telling Nantini, my friend, a story, that once, some years ago, the 3 Abrahamic calendars were together in one celebration. We Jews celebrated Passover, is the freedom, from Egypt to the land of Israel, the freedom, okay? Then the Easter for Christians, from the earth to heaven and then back. But also the Muslims were celebrating at the same time Laylat al-Isra, Laylat al-Miraj, the journey from the Prophet Muhammad from the Mecca to the Holy Land and then to heaven and then back. So I said, okay, let's open the door of my community to the 3 shared celebrations, hoping that at least 20 people, 30 people were coming. An hour before, many people came with flowers and candles and food for helping on the preparation. And we finished with 200 people inside the congregation. Which people that when they knew that there was a place to be with the other, they decided that this is important. Because might be that many people even don't know that this is a possibility. So in everyone's place, development responsibility, we can open the field, and you might be very surprised how many people were interested even without noticing. This is my own perspective, and it's always successful. For sure, there might be people that are not interested. Okay, then we will think about them. But first of all, let's take all those that are in the middle, the ground, in the middle, in the 2 extremists.
So let me tell a couple of stories that sometimes stories are better than... and I think the answer is to step back from the individuals in the way that you're suggesting. And I think and step forward with the reason to engage with them. So I was in the south of England last February with my grandson, who's a great mate, my big friend. And we were in Hastings in the south of England at a time, and it's a continuing time, when many people are arriving by small boats from France, illegal immigrants. A major source of issue for all sorts of reasons, some good and some difficult, but clearly fueling a polarized political view about the other. And on the beach, as we were walking along, there were 2 groups of people. One really angry group, which won't surprise you, who were there to protest and to resist and to push back, and were protesting against this little speck which was coming across the channel. And another group of lovely people with blankets and hot water and coffee and tea. You'd expect both in the sort of societies that I'm fortunate we live in. And what happened? I was worried about my grandson, who was 13, and I said to myself, maybe we should just walk on. This might be difficult. But we didn't. He was interested. I was, of course, interested, and I sat and watched. And what happened is this boat came closer and closer. The 2 groups became more and more distant, one from another, clearly driven by different feelings, behaviors, different drivers. And you could see this now. This is our business, so we're interested in that. But the most remarkable thing happened. I don't exaggerate. As the boat got close to shore, before it gets to shore, people jump off and make their own way. That's what happens. The first person off the boat was a woman in a niqab, completely veiled, and she struggled in the water. And both groups merged into one because humanity took over, and they went to save the woman. It was quite remarkable. And it taught me that it's a real thing that happened. And I know you can intellectualize it afterwards and say what was going on there. But I think it's not the difference that's easy to resolve. The easier thing to resolve is our common humanity. And this feeling that first this was someone in stress, in difficulty. Second, she was an illegal alien and whatever. I think this is the answer. So the answer to the question is find the common humanity and work on that. Don't expect people to want to get to know the other. Find a reason why getting to know the other might make sense and let them come to that opinion. That's what happened. Now, as soon as they were safe on the beach, they went back to their antagonism. But that was a moment that I felt quite optimistic about because humanity prevailed.
Okay, again, that's a wonderful sort of point there. And of course, with these polarisation, we often put out to people like, these are the evil people, why do they hate people? But of course, people aren't driven to this by hatred, it's love of their community, they want to protect their community, and that then makes them against other people. So I think perhaps this question of reaching out is this understanding that there is humanity there on the other side. You have to see each person as an individual, there's a story as to how they got there. It's not that it's a bad person, but there's a story that leads them into these kind of sort of questions.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
Because what I suggest also is to inspire people to think why they are hating this person that is coming from the boat. Yeah. How it comes that suddenly that you are totally disconnected with his culture, his religion, his economical situation, you hate him. What happened in you that you naturalized, that you suddenly reject this person? This is important for me to work with together here this evening.
Okay, I'm going to sort of take 3 questions together in the next block, because there are 3 kind of historically centred questions, and I'll read one of them and then I'll summarise some points from the others. So, okay, so from a historical perspective, have societies ever fully moved past polarisation, or does it simply shift over time? How should we prepare for its recurring forms while working towards a more stable middle ground? And somebody else has asked a question around these cycles. Does polarisation and sort of a more sort of mainstream sort of come and go over time, and how do we prepare for this? And another person kind of asking also how in our contemporary time, are we facing something new, and does that mean our techniques as to how we have to change this are new? So if I can take perhaps, your questions on whether you want to talk about sort of the historical aspect or the cyclic aspect, or simply what are we facing now, and so what do we have to do in the current situation? Maybe Mike can go first this time.
So, yeah, I am a believer that there is a cycle, and it actually relates to the context in which we're in. The context is really important. And polarization results because of people are in a certain set of conditions exist in which polarization provides an immediate solution or immediate position that they can relate to. So I think when things are very stable and when the economy is going well, when everyone has work, when there's no pressure on housing and health, when there's less obvious, evident, in-your-face inequality, deprivation and anxiety, when there's not existential threat. If we can remember, because there aren't many times when that describes where we are in reality, then polarization doesn't have hooks to hang itself on. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And I think it dissipates. It becomes easier. It becomes less problematic. When people are looking to export some of the anxiety that they have, they look for a blame, they look for a victim, they look to point. And the polarizing forces in politics find it much easier to ground and to find the hooks. So I think that happens. I think what we have now, last week I was in London at the House of Commons at the publication of the Global Peace Index for 2025 from the Institute of Economics and Peace in Sydney. And it's a pretty dismal read at the moment. This year, every year for the last 16 years, the index has been, it measures the degree of peace and conflict in the world, and we're not in a good place. And as a result, there's a lot of anxiety. As we're speaking now, airspace is being closed. There are all sorts of problems, as we know, in different parts of the world. 59 different places in the world, I'd have you know it, currently. People are killing each other for whatever reason. And the external consequences of that are providing the hooks on which political expedience by some, particularly the far right at the moment, are finding it easy to get traction. So I think this notion of the centrifugal force I referred to, when the context in which we're in is difficult and drives people into what they think are simpler, clearer positions, the middle ground disappears. And that's a great shame. And I often look with some amazement at what's happening in the United States. My mother was American, so I have a lot of family there. It bothers me greatly. But at the moment, there's a vacuum. there is a sort of a dilution of many of the forces that counter what's going on. So what's going on has become easier to happen and to emerge. And the polarization, in other words, is driven by context. And as we've heard over the last couple of days, without being miserable, the context doesn't look as though it's going to change anytime soon. So we have to have a strategy for dealing with the polarization that's going to remain a permanent feature, which is the point I was making, we were both making.
I can think the way the other way around, because I remind of a book written by Bruce Feiler, a North American journalist, that made an investigation with three religious leaders from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, talking about Abraham, okay? Because each religion says that Abraham is its father, okay? And instead of seeing ourselves brothers and sisters, we are struggling who is the most faithful father. But he made an investigation about the position of each religion regarding Abraham, and the conclusion is very interesting. It's the other way around. He said, at the beginning of religions, the religion that appeared after the other needed to destroy the first to be the truly one, okay? The time of the victory of every new religion happened with Christianity against Jews, happened with Islam against... But now we are not living in this moment. And perhaps one of the things is to understand that the main purpose, at least of our belief, I'm speaking about religion, but the truly believer, the truly religious person has to embrace the brotherhood and not to buy the social political polarization where we're immersed to. That's why I think that religions, more than ever, have a place in the common ground, not only in our sanctuaries. It's time to make the streets our sanctuaries, because, you know, I've read that 80% of the humanity is a believer. 80% of humanity believes in something. So let's take the transcendental, what we worship, what we believe, what we pray to put it in the streets and to make it a common good. We preserve this message of common good within our sanctuaries. It's time to go outside and together to make an opposition to the speeches of polarization and hate.
So Su Ying, your question actually also talked about how we should prepare. How should we prepare while polarization comes? And I think I didn't really respond to that. And I think it's a really important part of the question. And I think it's about your time horizons. And this is something we can do, all of us. When I was a youngster, I looked forward 20 to 30 years. I did. I remember it because I've discussed it with my children and with my grandchildren now. They look forward 10 or 20 months. Right? And I think we have to get back, if we want to prepare, while we wait for this more stable ground, middle ground to emerge, if it ever does, we have to try and push our time horizons forward. Remove the pressure from now, which fuels the looking for a quick fix. Polarization is very much a simple, clear, very quick fix to dealing with complexity. And just say, look, can we, and I think faith is one way of doing that. The religious movements do look hugely long terms, infinitely in terms of terms, but that we've lost that a lot. And I think in the way we construct our language, tell our stories, the way we help our young people with their education, we have to push the time horizons into the long term, and that would help.
Okay, thank you both for those questions. You've been talking about sort of complexity there, which is I can lead into the next question I've picked out from these, which is around paradox. And actually, perhaps as I come there, you've mentioned Abraham here as this potential sort of source. And of course, we often sort of, perhaps amongst those three Abrahamic religions, as we term them, it's a problem actually saying three Abrahamic religions. Because of course, you've got various other groups who also look back to Abraham beyond Jews, Christians and Muslims. So we sometimes forget groups there. that, you know, this one symbol can be both a source of unity, as you said, like to guide in father, but also they tell such radically different stories about him, that it can be this source of disunity as well. And this leads me on this question around sort of perhaps sort of paradox, which I'll read in just a second, because of course it relates to our identities, and this question here, what does a symbol mean to us? If we recognise that our identities, of course, are always plural, we never have a singular identity, and of course part of polarisation is this becoming fixated on a singular identity and not having, if you like, the maturity to move towards more complex, sort of multi-layered sort of identities. But the actual question, if I come and read it out from Chung, what are some of... Oh, no, that's not a question, sorry. So it's very good you ask many questions. It then just makes it harder for me to actually find them. Yes, paradox. Okay, yes. There is a question somewhere around paradox, I'm sure. So I can't find it at the moment, but there's a question around sort of paradox and how sort of we live with complexity, how we sort of introduce paradox in how we deal with these questions around polarisation and extremism. So perhaps I might, and this was your point, so maybe you can talk first about this.
This is a passion of mine. It says that one of the qualities of leadership in the 21st century is being better and more comfortable with paradox, because I don't think we are. So, and there's plenty of examples, simple ones without getting into some of the more tense areas. You know, we used to celebrate the advent of international travel. Isn't it wonderful? Low-cost flights, great, all right? Nobody looked forward to see how we should have been adapting ourselves and our communities to accommodate them, not just for the climate and the carbon footprint, but for Spain. It's a country I love that's overrun with visitors, so much so that it destroys local communities. So the over-tourist impact. So dealing with paradox is something that's going to be more and increasingly important in a time of complex adaptive systems. And we are in a time of complexity. You know, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, how well did we do in terms of same agenda? Not very well. And probably because we weren't very good at dealing and being comfortable with the paradoxical likely outcomes. So the scientists told us to separate, to keep apart, and we'd slow down the transmission of this terrible virus. Absolutely correct. But they didn't tell us if we did that, we'd destroy a generation of education for young people, we'd create mental health problems and grow isolation, and we'd go back into our walls that we'd build as a result. So dealing with paradox is an important thing, and it's certainly important when it comes to social cohesion. Because some of the solutions that we may stumble into, may not be the obvious ones at all. And it may not be that we have a textbook of what we need to do as a society in order to create more cohesiveness, more cohesion. It may be that it comes from remarkably different places. That's the optimist in me about social media, about the digital world, and about AI. Because maybe somewhere in all that mess, there's a different way of resolving some of the issues that are causing us concern at the moment.
May I? When I read Paradox of Tolerance, for me it's a problem. Because sometimes we make the paradox our shelter not to make any decision. We are in the middle of a paradox. The problem is of the paradox, and it's not our problem. And I think that there are some issues, human issues, that they oblige us to go out this paradox and to take a position. And related to that, I understood through the years about what you were saying, Paul, that sometimes people also make a refugee within the intellectual honesty, no? Intellectual honesty has to do that I can say anything because someone said that, it's written, and I quote, and that's it, intellectual honesty. And you can make all the harm as you can do. Tolerance, a word that I don't like at all. But But I understood that people of goodwill have to make a choice and to have a spiritual honesty. At the moment I quote a thing, at the moment I say a thing, I am making a spiritual choice, because these words that I haven't written are mine. This source that I am choosing now is my voice. So I think that sometimes people speak within the voices of others, and we need to understand that all the time we open our mouth is our voice, our position, and this is us. So for me, it's important to teach the people that are with me, my community, my friends, my family, my kids, that it's so important to be responsible of the things that you are saying and the position that you are making, because this is yours.
So this specific question is a really powerful one, but I think I agree. I'm not a very fan of tolerance at all. No. Tolerance, to me, is permission, and that's why it's problematic.
From an authority.
Exactly. So I always push back, not on the paradox, but on the notion of tolerance, and if it applies in this way. And I much prefer the concept of acceptance rather than tolerance. And I think you just have to be transparent in the way you feel if you're uncomfortable. And some people mean acceptance when they mean tolerance. Well, it's fine, but then it's worth exploring what you really mean. If you're just tolerating something because it's convenient or because you're instructed to do, that's pretty unhealthy.
Yes, very much agreed that tolerance is not what we should be aiming at. Also, I often tell people sometimes tolerance is actually a big step for some people. For moving from hatred to tolerance, we shouldn't dismiss it when we get there. Sometimes, yes, it can be a good thing. Now, I want to move to a very important question next. This is about the role of youth. I can see it's important to many young people because I can tell there are many of the youth leaders in here. If you're wondering how I do that, you all have different coloured lanyards if you haven't worked it out yet. So I can see all the young leaders in the audience with this. So, yes, the question is, how can youth balance their role in advocating for change with the need to avoid becoming polarised in the process? So I think I'm not, of course, just a question for youth. This is, I think, something for all of us sort of to think about. And just, of course, to mention, those of you who are not aware, the whole ICCS is actually followed. We have 200 people in the Young Leaders Programme who've got another 2 days of events following on from this, and it's been part of the planning from ICCS all the way from 2018, of course, 2019 the first one, but planning back in 2018. This is something we thought was fundamental to everything we do in ICCS, is to have the youth leaders as part of this. So,
I want to say only one sentence. I would love young people to be polarized in this side of the world. I mean, to be absolutely in love with the possibility of creating a new atmosphere, a new humanity. I need young people also not to be tender, no? That to have passion, no? To, as Pope Francis said, make noise, like, changing. I want you to be polarized, not confronted, but polarized through a better present, not a future, a better present in our days.
So, as an oldie, I do have strong views about young people. I worry because I think there are qualities of isolation and insulation that young people, and their disenfranchisement by us generally has led them not to be as active politically and as participative as I certainly was when I was a youngster. And I push back against the demarcation between young and old. I'm a very strong believer in intergenerational work. But I rather talk about multi-generational. I think we need young people as part of the mainstream agenda. I disapprove of 200 of you following on. You should be here now, not the day after this one finishes. It's not some special event that we give permission to the young people to start mobilizing. But that's just my view. I had a wonderful experience once in past. When I was a diplomat, I ran a program for the British government and it was called The Next Generation. And it was very much about mobilizing young people to be confident about initiating change. And we went all over the world, typical British government scheme, how many millions of pounds, I have no idea, recruiting teams of young people to be the next generation. And they got a little scholarship and we did little training and so forth. And I was outside Dhaka in Bangladesh. Here's me, white guy in this suit with my briefcase, talking in a village outside in rural Bangladesh. And the local people had collected these amazing kids to come and do this program. And I was there doing my bit. This is a wonderful, empowering thing, you know, the next generation, talk about it. And this girl stood up, I kid you not, 14 years old, in perfect English, and told me off. Mr. Mike, she said, why are you talking about the next generation? We're here now. We're not waiting for some period in the past. I got into a total sense of anxiety and self-recrimination. We went back that night and we changed the name to This Generation, yeah, in respect of that point. But the point was not lost on us, but we failed to do that even by now. That's years ago. We work intergenerationally, that's between the generations. We mobilize, we recognize energy, youth, and so forth. We don't yet work multi-generationally, where we expect there to be the full participation of young people in the decisions. My country in 2016 took us out of our European Union membership without reference to a young people. By the time we left, a large number of 15 and 16-year-olds were then adults, and they would have voted against. So there's many things about the decision about Britain leaving the European Union, but that's the most painful to me, that we did it without the participation of our future. And that's a consequence that we will have to live with. And I think in terms of social cohesion, it's a major problem for us now in the UK. It's led to the impoverishment of many of our communities. There are direct economic and others, of course, would come and say exactly the opposite because the views are polarizing. But the latest statistics show that each member of the population of the United Kingdom, all 60+ million, will lose £4,000. That's about $5,000 a year forever because of that decision. So there's an economic consequence quite apart from the team, collaborative, collective leadership consequence of a Europe that's an important member of a world context that needs collaboration, needs collective leadership. So, but that was, I think, largely the result of a political establishment ignoring young people. Absolutely. That's the way I see it.
Yes, thank you. Very important points you've added into that. And of course, yes, multi-generational is incredibly important. And just to clarify, yes, the young people are here now. They get 2 extra days. So they get more than the rest of us. So they get benefits, I hope, out of this.
I stand corrected.
Right. Yes. Okay, so move on. Looking at the time, we have just over 10 minutes left. So I'll try and sort of put in 2 more sets of questions to us. So the first one is painful experiences past and present might have prevented meaningful interactions and accentuated extremism polarization. How can we move away from these narratives yet still be mindful of our own history? I think this is a very complicated question. Those past... Yes, the question is coming up. So those... Sorry. Yes, I do speak fast. Apologies. It's partly I'm watching the time. I want to get it all out. But yes. So the question is there, and this has come up in some of the other questions as well around sort of trauma and other questions. How do we deal? Because of course these are very real experiences. So how do we move on, but not, of course, letting go of this? Maybe Rabbi Silvina, you'd like to come first on this?
you know that when the question is how can we move away from these narratives, I think that there is, as I said, an official agenda about the narratives that we consume, because they are worthy for some higher purposes. But there are other narratives, the unofficial story that also happens. And painful experiences, past and present, not only put us in extremists and in different parts of the world, many of the suffering experiences put us together. And I might say something, because you may have been thinking that I am a Jew, and you are very respectful, but the point of what is happening in the Middle East, I'm also feel the eyes of many people looking at me, even I am an Argentinian. But we have a narrative of this conflict, but I guess that most of you even don't know the multiple and positive and powerful activities and manifestations of Arab, Christians and Muslims and Jews, Palestinian and Israelis people are doing, are programs making, are marching, women wage peace from Israel, women of the sun in Palestine, working together for no one else dead. I mean, this is another narrative, and painful experience can unify us because of our awe, or can divide us. We have to choose which narrative we consume. And for me, this is very important. We are inviting to Argentina one representative of women wage peace from Israel, one Christian Palestinian Israeli woman, and one Muslim Palestinian woman coming together to Argentina and to Uruguay to make the testimony of their work, of their narrative. Again, we have to put this narrative on the public ground. And I think that painful experiences many times make us make meaningful interactions, even the media is not interested in them.
So, and thank you for that. And my answer is simple. You never, ever, how dare you move away from painful experiences. This is no solution at all. The relationships that you form, if you park a narrative of that kind, is not a real relationship at all. So we have to find ways of dealing and of incorporating painful experience. The trauma in Israel now, from October the 7th, is a powerful and real trauma, as is the trauma that's taking place in huge scale in Gaza or other parts. I lived in the West Bank for 2 years. But trying to park it in order to make progress, you won't make progress. That's my view. And I think this is one of the ways in which we have to deal with pushing the time horizons and moving the cultures and behaviors moving forward. So it's not easy. But so how do you do it? Well, I referred to sort of the way in which I argue that leadership should look at the past to inform the future yesterday. We have to look back and find the things that we treasure, things that are important, and we have to bring them forward with us, not leave them behind. And we have to know what to discard in order to make progress. So you don't discard a painful memory and a real trauma. You discard the anger and the hatred that generated, if you're able to. And you talk about it in the way that that question has provoked us to. In my UN work in the past, I was involved in Srebrenica. I've been working most recently with a hugely talented PhD student looking at building trust in post-genocide Rwanda. And I can assure you, the last thing you do is ignore the reality of the event and the trauma. But mobilizing it in the way you said, putting it into its right location and discarding the negatives, the anger, the violence that is innately part of your inadequate reaction to the trauma is really important. And the third part of your way of managing, treasuring things, discarding things, you have to know how to innovate, how to create a different and better place. And that's by the dialogue you're talking about, by mobilizing people, bringing them together. To my friends in Gaza and in Israel, I say, you know, it's not going to go away. It's going to be there forever. So the sooner we sort this out, the longer we'll have enjoying it. The coexistence is not enough. It's more than that we need. As Singaporean president quite correctly said, coexistence isn't enough. And I think at the moment that's all people are trying to do. And it won't work. It's not enough. You have to go beyond coexistence in the way of the complex ways in which we've been discussing.
Okay, thank you much. I think I might have to say in due respect to Michael who asked this question, his question is how can we move away from these narratives yet still be mindful of the history? So he's not suggesting we forget it. No. So I think what you've been talking about really is actually answering this, in case we get the impression that we have people suggesting we forget the history and the pain. Now, we have about 3.5 minutes left, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a couple of questions together and ask you to answer this, perhaps each of you about 1.5 minutes, and also give your closing thoughts. And there's a couple of questions, so I'll pick one of them, which is what are some ways we can reduce polarization in our everyday lives? So we've had a couple of these kind of questions, you know, what can I actually do in practice? What is the ordinary person in the street going to do about this? So if you can give perhaps again some nice practical takeaways, and I said give your concluding thoughts on this. So perhaps, Mike, I'll come to you first. So I said about 1.5 minutes, and then to you, Rabbi Silvina.
So I think the way we reduce polarization is by calling it out and by gently looking at sharing a discussion around the consequences of polarization. I don't think those who are polarized, taking very hard positions, very extreme positions, very closed positions, always understand the consequences of the position they take. So one way forward to reduce polarization is to try and open the issues, to discuss the consequences, what I call the so what of the position you're taking. Let me finish with a story because it's, there are some good, I have a wonderful center at Coventry University that has done amazing work. One of the projects they had was to try and convince the European Union that the Syrian refugees that were coming, this was a couple of years back, as a result of conflict in the Middle East. The Germans had taken a huge number, Angela Merkel had opened her borders, but most European countries were feeling really anxious about this. And it was fueling the very polarization that we've talked about. These are the other. The research that was done by colleagues of mine in the center took a team to the Greek islands where people were arriving from Turkey on small boats with Chinese-provided life jackets. Somebody had entrepreneurial spirit and was selling these life jackets for once use, so forth. And they asked a series of questions of the refugees as they got off the boats. And they weren't the normal questions about, you know, why are you doing it and so forth, why are you coming, which would inform a policy decision in Brussels about how to deal with this flow of people. Question one, what did you do in the last hour before you left your home in Syria, in Mosul, before the city was destroyed? What did you do? It's an incredibly question, but what it was doing was trying to give ammunition to those that were fighting the polarized view that were growing up. And what did you bring with you? Refugees bring two things always. They bring their mobile phone and their children. Seems reasonable. And the second question was, what else did you bring with you? And the second is well documented and often been in the press. I brought the key to my door. The first question, though, what was the answer to the first question? What did you do in the last hour? Did you celebrate? Did you cuddle your friends? Did you say goodbye? What happened? I buried my treasure. 60% of the women that were asked, this wasn't gold and silver. This was the chair that they wanted to keep, the picture that they couldn't carry with them. Those two answers said a very powerful something about refugees. They wanted to go home. And they had every plan to go home, even though they knew it was unlikely. This allowed, I think, the research project to be articulate and powerful and impactful by going to Brussels and saying, we have evidence now that these aren't coming to take your benefits, your jobs, your houses, your hospital places. Actually, the driving force for these people is the safety and security of their families, and they want to go home. I think that helps in reducing polarized views that otherwise would be continue to be reinforced within the Commission. Didn't have wonderful impact, but it had a noticeable impact. Thank you for your attention, and the questions were amazing.
Thank you for this story. My grandparents were born in Syria, in Damascus, and they had to flee because of the persecution against Jews. And I will never, ever know the place of my grandparents. And this is very sad for me. Just 30 seconds, because this is red here. You know that people learn to be polarized. Learn not to listen to the other. Learn to hate, as they can learn to love. They can learn to make a common ground, an agreement. So my task as an educator, and a spiritual educator, is to begin in a very, very, very early age. And because this is a question, every group in school is a small society. And if you teach them to listen, if you teach them to share different positions, and it sounds very simple regarding the big issues that we are talking about these days, but it is as simple as important. People know and learn how to hate and how to be polarized. People can learn how to love and how to agree with the other, or at least coexist with the other.
Okay, thank you very much both. And you've mentioned there what I often think are the most important skills, but much underrated. I teach a master's course on dialogue, and I tell my students the single most important skill you can learn to do good dialogue is listen. Of course, we all do it. We don't do it very well. Learning how to listen well is incredibly hard. It's a lifetime of work, but that's really key. Now, we have run over time, and of course, you're wanting to get back, I'm sure, to your more coffees and your cakes and whatever else has been provided here. So I'll let you out. But again, thank you very much to our panel, and of course, thank you all of you for your questions.